I know today there is an urban-rural divide. There's a digital partition that has happened. But if a bunch of lateral thinking, like-minded people put their heads together, I think we can find solutions to that as well. There are certain causes and certain things, certain what do you call it, emotions that actually unite much more than they divide. And if you go that way, there are many other things that can happen. The purpose of education can be to unify and to seek and discover delight in differences.
I think when we're specifically talking children and we're talking about what should they learn, how should they grow, I think in that case I'll say it's not a choice to not choose love and compassion, because that's what you want them to learn. And no matter how much if I'm angry that there's no love and compassion in the world, I'm just going to pass on that anger. I'm not going to pass on love and compassion to children.
Through the sheer exposure to beauty of different kinds, a child or an adult will realize that something is amiss in this conformist way, something is amiss in what they're telling us. The idea is also to make people believe that they do belong to a very special breed, because, if you believe it, then you behave it, right? So, if you tell someone, listen, man, you're a wonderful writer, you should write more, he will write more, and that's one way of actually inspiring a whole new generation.
What if you could lateralize learning and education, especially using the arts, to help us unify and delight in our differences?
This is an edition of What If Reflections, where we are going to be talking to one of my favorite filmmakers, popularly known as Paddy. Padmakumar used to work with the advertising field as a country creative head of Rediffusion, Dentsu. You left after 17 years, is that right, of the working in the creative space to make this film called A Billion Colors Story, right? And the film that you wrote, you directed yourself, and also earned a nomination at the Busan International Film Festival in the New Current selection. And it went on to also kind of feature in other festivals as well, right? And I think the latest achievement is that it went on to Netflix and therefore made more accessible to a larger audience. What I've also read is that you've also created something called the Thinkistan, which I'm yet to watch, and a show which continues to earn positive reviews, and a second feature, Distant Teardrop. And is that supposed to be out this year or next year?
It is an optimistic film. It's a film with a, that's always been my hugest peeve with humanity. Everyone seems to mistrust everyone else, and there's no connection. There are more walls being built than bridges. So,
definitely look forward to that.
Yeah. So in my own small way, I try to tell these stories, and so this one was due for a release in Sri Lanka earlier this year, but then Corona had other ideas. Yeah. So we're just waiting. It's in abeyance. We'll see what happens.
Thank you so much. Definitely look forward to that movie as well. Yeah. So Padma, Suchetha is the CEO of Dream a Dream, and it's a charitable trust working with young people from vulnerable backgrounds to overcome adversity and flourish in the 21st century using a creative life skills approach. What is interesting is that the methodology that Dream a Dream has been working with has been recognized by an organization 100 as one of the most important innovations in this space. And also has been recognized among 10 champions in the world that are reimagining learning through play by the Ashoka and Lego Foundation.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And I don't know if this has to be are much more, but right now it's touted that Dream a Dream works with over 10,000 young people, training over 5,000 educators, impacting over 137,500 children and young people, and sensitizing over 2,500 volunteers through the life skills development model. Yeah, but more so, I've known Suchetha for about less than 10 years now, but know her as this emerging women voice and a leader both in the education space as well as in general as a leader itself, and brings in the lens of empathy and compassion in her work as well. Yeah. So this particular edition, right? And both Suchetha and I have seen the movie, and I think the discussion is not going to be about the movie, but we're going to take this as a starting point to kind of reflect about a few questions that have come up. And again, in the context of reimagining what the purpose of education can look like. And Padma, we spoke, when we spoke last, you did say that you had much to contribute as long as it can translate into something concrete, right? So we're going to keep that in the back of our mind as we're having this discussion. But briefly, I'm just going to talk about a Billion Color Story as a synopsis, right, of what that movie is, and then take off from there.
Okay.
Right? What I found interesting is that that this is a story from the perspective of the 11-year-old boy, Hari Aziz, right, and brought up in an environment where the parents are non-judgmental. They are always instilling goodness and hope in the son, even when there is this wave of intolerance, right? And also, what's endearing is the way the son is attached to the father, and a father who believes that the country is incredible and there is always goodness to fall back on. Right. With that as I'm not going to give away the movie because again, I think it's definitely worth going back to more than once. Right. But with that as a backdrop, my first question, and something that you also kind of referred to, that you are an eternal optimist and an idealist, right? And through the movie, you also spoke of the poetry that the country has, and not just the country, I would assume even that the world has.
The world, yes.
Right, and somewhere we've lost that poetry. Right? So, what is that poetry that you're talking about? If you can help visualize, right, from your lens.
Yeah. Just loosely, when you look at poetry, what is poetry? Poetry is how, lateral thoughts collide, become metaphors for each other, and exist in a very musical, beautiful, rhythmic sort of way, right? And when we talk of the poetry of India or the poetry of the world, the idea, at least, is my belief that there is poetry that exists all around us. Is exactly this. It's a literal interpretation of this metaphor, which is that people with diverging ideologies, thought processes, beliefs, superstitions, languages, all of them somehow seem to mesh beautifully together, and humanity seems to move forward, more in harmony than in disharmony. So so the belief that this poetry is always going to overpower the what do you call it, the possibility of disharmony, that is the idealism, and that's really where my belief system lies. And you know 7 years ago when my mom died, after all the rituals and everything, I drove from Bombay all the way to Ladakh, and I felt it was so easy for me, being a Bombay bred Telugu boy, and driving and educated in English, and knowing just Hindi that I could speak fluently. I was able to communicate with pretty much everyone, and everyone was able to communicate back with me. And all I needed to do was offer somebody a lift, and that person would not let me leave without having a tea with him, or food at his place, or and this is really India when it's not channeled with along the lines of hatred and mistrust and othering of people. And to them it didn't make a difference what car I was driving or what I looked like or what language I spoke. I mean, the Punjabi spoke to me in Punjabi, and though I understood just a smattering of a word here and there, they could tell me which way to go, and I was able to get it. And I think that's really how simple it is. When I was in Ladakh, I was whitewater rafting with a bunch of Israelis, and we found compatibility because I'd heard the music of Asaf Avidan, who's an Israeli singer. So there's always, you need just one uh, little link, and things get enmeshed, and things get beautifully, rhythmic and beautiful. This is my constant belief, and unfortunately, of course, we should not talk about what the zeitgeist is at this moment. But on my part, I'm going to do my damnedest, to to try and stem the flow, or to redivert things towards music and poetry and words and art, and that kind of stuff.
That kind of leads me to the next question, right? Because somewhere in one of the interviews that you gave, you also did mention that you would never be able to make something that looks at the dark side of life, right? Because and to quote you, because you could never look at life with suspicion, because if we are looking over our shoulder all the time, how will we look ahead?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's in a way the role of art is both representing as well as
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
sharing a different possibility, right?
Yeah.
But I had a question there. um, Again, something that we saw through the movie but also through our personal life experiences, right? Time and again, especially adults, and I would imagine even the child's ideas are met with oppression, resistance, or at the best polite appreciation and dismissal, right? I mean, just to kind of give an example from the movie itself, how Satish Kaushik says, brilliant idea, and then kind of
Yeah.
dismisses, right?
Yeah.
And I would imagine this is an experience that we all go through, not so much with polite dismissal, but oppression is conformity, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree? Not as a filmmaker, not as a billion color story, but would you agree?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I don't entirely disagree, but I mean, there is always another way, right? Uh, my son, for instance, was never a good student. You know, he's extremely intelligent. He writes poetry. He has a very high IQ for music. He can act. He's very sensitive. All of that, and but he's always hated school. So when he got to class 10, I felt that he looked like he was not enjoying life at all. He looked always haunted and hunted, and I felt, why not just home educate him? Everybody thought it was a bad idea, but for the first time in his life, he cracked his class 10 and he became academically very good. And today he's really confident. So there are other ways of doing these things, and I think, and looking at this, a whole lot of his classmates have now moved to homeschooling and that kind of thing. And I think there is always a new way. And going further, if you listen to Yuval Noah Harari's conversations, and if you read his books, I mean, in another 20, 30 years, the skills that we are learning academically today will be redundant tomorrow. Even doctors will go out of business. They'll go out of work because a machine can diagnose your system and your ailments and give you a cure much more accurately than a human mind can, because everything's being scanned and analyzed and diagnosed. They can see through your body, they can read your intestines, they can see your heart, they can see your liver. Everything can be sorted. So I don't know if conformity is the only answer. Maybe I always feel that lateral thinking is the answer, and the flexibility is the answer more than conformity.
Thank you, Padma. And I think I'll bring in Suchetha here, because also the question that kept occurring in my mind is that also that a billion color story is a perspective of an urban family, right? And the thought or the option of homeschooling that you said is definitely something that comes easily in a way, right?
Yes.
Not easy. I wouldn't say easily, but then definitely comes as an option.
Yeah.
But there is also that there is also the lens of adversity that we cannot choose to ignore.
Of course.
I just just wanted to bring in Suchetha here and maybe take the same question, Suchetha. right? And given what you have seen with the work that you've done with Dream a Dream, and also given the reality of the situation that we are seeing right now in the context of pandemic, in the context of this seemingly inescapable compulsion to go back to digital as a medium, but keeping in mind the children from vulnerable backgrounds. If you are to take the same question, right, is conformity a way to go, right? Is there another way? How would you take that question?
For me, today, conformity has become something that works for a very small population of people, because conformity is also, what are we conforming to comes from messages, conditioning, how we think, what success in society looks like. So conforming, like going to school, then going to college, getting a job, is a sense of conformity, which for me is applicable to a very small percentage of people, especially young people in a country like India, where we have 130 million children living in poverty. We have dropouts, by the time they're hitting 7th, 8th grade, there's 70-80% dropout of children from formal schooling. So then what is the definition of conformity, and where do we operate from? So when, as Padma, you were sharing about your son, I was reminded of the reason I made the transition. I was working in the corporate myself. I was in IBM, and I started volunteering, and I was a mentor to a young girl while still working with IBM. And as a mentor, we used to meet once every couple of weeks, and it was her 10th standard. That's, I think, why I remember. And through that year, right, she went from being the shy, really scared to speak to somebody who came from such a different background from herself, exploring places with me where she might not have otherwise gone. We really built this bond, and we made this connection, and I could see her confidence grow, her ability to interact, her ability to talk about herself. All of that I saw increase and build up over that year. But then she failed her 10th standard. I lost contact with her. She stopped getting in touch with me. And then I came to know, because I used to meet her in the community center that she used to go to, that it's because of shame. She thinks I will judge her. So I had to find a way to reach out to her, just to let her know that it doesn't matter to me. So I'm not going to judge her. She's not let me down. And when I got back in touch with her, I came to know that she had got a job as a parking attendant at Forum. So that was kind of the last I heard of her, and a couple of weeks after that, her mom frantically called me. She just found my number in one of the books of, my mentee, and she said that she's run away from home. I've never heard from her since then. I only pray that she's safe. So that's what it occurred to me, that this, like 10th didn't mean anything to me, but she carried so much shame. She then had to make choices clearly she didn't want to do, conform, to earning money in a way that, I think she was just anxious to go work in a mall where, again, the people and everything, the environment would be so different from who she is. So for me, I think that's kind of the pattern I'm seeing, that when we're saying conformity. And Paddy, to then your question around COVID, the same pattern is what we have seen exasperated at a much more louder and amplified way, especially with the digital divide. We already know that only 20-30% of children actually have access to devices. Lesser number of children have access to internet. And yet we are touting online education as though it can be possible. Instead of saying it's not possible in a country like India. So then what are the alternatives? And we've already heard stories of how children are committing suicide just because they can't get online. The last article I read on it is we went from a digital divide to now a digital partition, because that is the experience of children. They are really feeling there is two sides of people who have access and who don't. Yeah. So for me, that's what conformity has become so narrow. Our definitions of success have become so narrow. Not only do children from, if I may say so, Padma, with supportive families, having to make different choices, but they absolutely don't work.
Yes.
Children who come from more vulnerable backgrounds.
Yes.
So it's not a choice.
Yeah.
But I think I want to kind of extend this question a little more, just to unpack, right, the oppression or the resistance, because right now I think also when we are responding to this question, we are probably limiting to the lens of being educated, right, with the support of the family and with probably the support of technology. But then I'm bringing back this whole um, lens of divide, right, or the othering that you were mentioning, Padma, earlier, right, which also kind of comes as a reference in the movie. It is not just about religion. It is also about the language that you speak. It is about the North versus South. It's about being atheist versus religious. Where does it stop, right? The othering, that when we are speaking about also the resistance that the child is facing, it's not just about the digital divide, but it's also about this othering, and at every stage.
Yeah, yeah. You know, see, the thing is that yeah, this is India, right? It is the most divided place on the planet. We have so many languages, we have so many things. I mean, something that is sacred to one community is sacrilege to another. So it's really very easy to actually divide along the lines of anything. You can crisscross, and you can you can make as many pieces of this country as you can. And uh, for me, I would say that I come from a place of privilege, you know. Uh, but having said all of that, we never faced penury or poverty at all. Born and brought up into absolute relative comfort and all of that. So I have never had to face any discrimination or whatever. But then some of us, uh, we take it personally, right? When somebody next to us is persecuted or whatever, and my psychotherapist says I have this whole knight in shining armor complex. I have to go and save somebody all the time, and I've had to actually mitigate that thing to for my own health. But having said that, it is impossible to be a sensitive human being and to have not noticed the absolute and immediate polarization that happened post 2014. And also, for people like me, it was all the more riling because we had predicted it would happen. We were hoping it would not happen, against hope, and it happened. And it's been inexorable, right? I mean, it's now been 6 years and just tanking and tanking and tanking. And right now, you're seeing whatever is happening in the country. So, mm, so I felt that of what use is my ability to write and shoot and tell a story or whatever, if I can't say this, and if I can't say this at a time when it's still possible to speak my mind, because in the near future it's not going to be possible, and that's what I have predicted, and that's what I feel is happening now. you know so that was a time when we could do it, and so I put my whole life savings into making that film, because obviously no producer would have said, oh, wonderful script, let me give you a few crores to make this, right? So, and who was going to anyway support a film that had no known personality, no songs, no lip sync, no dance, no stars, and not even any color? So who's going to put any money behind that? So I said, this is me. I have to make my own thing happen, and that's what happened. Uh, but for me, for me, the greatest pity is that I wanted like a I wanted multitudes of people to see it, but it's again only being watched mostly by the converted, not the ones to convert, not the ones who should be. I feel that uh, when things have to happen and when you have to do it, you have to find some way of doing it. And yeah, even I know today there is an urban rural divide. There's a digital partition that has happened. But if a bunch of lateral thinking, like-minded people put their heads together, I think we can find solutions to that as well. We can uh, I've seen very, very tough barriers being breached, and uh, you know there are infinite ideas, and all we have to do is not diss them.
Yeah. And I'm just going to again and check if Suchetha has a response to this. The question of how difficult can this be, right? And especially having worked on the other side, Suchetha, if you want to, I know that wasn't a question really, but if you want to take that question.
So first, in terms of what I heard, I think the sign, at least for me, and I had that as I was listening to you, Padma, was that a sign of somebody who really wants to solve for the othering is that when you ask the question, you share about yourself. So I really appreciated that your answer was really about yourself and your journey and your reflection. And again, I saw so many parallels with my own journey of, recognizing my privilege. What is that role I'm playing? When I came into this work, I had no concept of it. It is conversations we don't generally have. So when I came into it, I was like, I have all these skills from the corporate that I can bring to education and to young people. But over the years, I've become much more sensitive to the damage I can do just by being blind to my privilege and how I can work through that. So, that's my answer to that othering, that it really comes from our own reflections of our privilege. And in terms of how difficult it can be, it is. I think it is very difficult. I'm excited by the possibility of lateral thinkers coming together, which is one of the reasons I really wanted to be here, to talk to somebody who's outside of my echo chamber. I'm typically talking to other educators. I'm talking to other people who are working directly with young people who are doing something very aligned with, the work itself. But I wanted to be on this call because I thought we could be aligned in thinking, but doing very different things. So for me, this is a coming together of very lateral ideas and ways of approaching this challenge that we're facing. But I do think it's very difficult. Mindset shift is very difficult.
If you confront and if you tell people, if you give people exactly what you want, like right now you want to say this government is really messing with the hearts and minds of the average Indian and creating divides. Now you have to break that divide and go head on and spread, open up the digital airways, whatever it is. You're not going to be able to do it. But there are certain universal causes that unite everybody. Certain things, certain emotions that actually unite much more than they divide. And if you go that way, there are many other things that can happen. If we define what exactly and we want to achieve and how exact and where exactly we want to go, then perhaps there are very I would say cunning emotional ways of getting there. And that I'm a believer in communication. That's I think we can attempt it. There are no guaranteed successes, but we can talk about it, attempt it, and perhaps make baby steps. Take some baby steps further.
Thank you. Through the movie, and also as a person, and also dream a dream and the work that you've been doing, there is that lens of compassion, that lens of love, this lens of empathy, to be addressing a problem as mammoth as this, right? And Padma, I wanted to bring you in to see, the belief in goodness. In a way, like I was also talking to you earlier, definitely seems and can be perceived as a weak idea, right? If you can, with the lens of this love and compassion that you're talking about, what would you reimagine the purpose of education to be? Right?
Yeah. I think the purpose of education can be to unify and to seek and discover delight in differences. Like today, today the West is really adopting yoga, okay, which is really ancient. I mean, they're not they're going back to simple body weight exercises. They're not looking at high tech machines to build their bodies, or to they're going back to vegetarianism, to plant based foods, all of those things. And we are discovering so many things about Africa, for instance, that are so deep and meaningful, and so knowledgeable. If you read The Roots by Alex Haley, you realize that some of the first slaves that the Americans took were actually princes and kings back in their country. you know and uh, you know you've heard of Ubuntu, right? The African practice of Ubuntu. Yeah. Which is, if somebody's uh, made a mistake in a tribe, everybody sits around that kid and tells him only all the good things that the kid has done in his life, thereby making him aware of his own inner goodness, and automatically changing his ways without punishment or whatever. And uh, so I feel education does this. It's about admiring, discovering, imbibing, and eventually also respecting, right? Differences.
There is some sense of discomfort that I'm facing right now as you share this, right?
Mm,
And the reason for my discomfort is also because I feel that in this choice of love and compassion, are we really blinding the injustices in some way? Right? And that's the discomfort I'm facing. And I'm just wanting to also hear from Suchetha. And I'm just going to challenge ourselves a little bit into the conversation. Yeah? Because I know there is, because I know I believe in the goodness of people, but there is also this growing discomfort in me that in this process, are we really kind of blinding ourselves?
and not calling out the evil as we
Not
see it.
calling out. Yeah, yeah.
Children are learning everywhere from everything. They're learning from watching your movies, they're learning from watching us. So when we are talking education, we really be basically saying, can we change the purpose of school? Because children spend so much time going to school, and there's a need to reimagine that. And in that, I'm hearing you say, yes, art can be an entry. So even if you want to teach math, even if you just want to teach, paying attention, focusing, understanding mathematics through music. Right? There's so much that art can do to teach you both scientific and life skills. We call them life skills. Uh, like more than whether love and compassion is blindness to evil, the question that's staying with me is, who do we become as people? If I'm an artist like you are, Padma, the movie and the message that you give from the movie and the message that you gave before this, that you said you're realistic, but what I heard was a pragmatic, empathetic approach to change. And that is my choice also, that change must be approached from a space of love and empathy, because that's what I've discovered in myself through art.
Mm.
So who do you want to be for young people? Because school is a small part of where they're learning from. And I have full respect for activist movement. They have their place, and there is a place for anger. But I think when we're specifically talking children and we're talking about what should they learn, how should they grow, I think in that case, I'll say it's not a choice to not choose love and compassion, because that's what you want them to learn. And no matter how much if I'm angry that there's no love and compassion in the world, I'm just going to pass on that anger. I'm not going to pass on love and compassion to children. And that's really what I heard from when Padma was talking about, there are certain universal causes that we can all rally around, and we can find that common ground. So I think especially in education, in children, in working in schools, and looking at how we want to, what are the values we want to pass on to our children, I think love and compassion is
Mm.
the
Either way, whether we start off with art or we counter with art, eventually the discovery that things are amiss, will happen. Whether we do it, uh, whether we overtly call things out and say, this is wrong and this is right. If, Even if we don't do that, I think uh, an approach through love and compassion, through acceptance, through discovery of other cultures, through the sheer exposure to beauty of different kinds, uh, a child or an adult will realize that something is amiss in this conformist way. Something is amiss in what they're telling us. So I feel, so I totally agree with Suchetha on this. In terms of uh, you know calling out, head-on collision. I've gone that way. I've gone that way and hit a, a stone wall that isn't breaking through simply banging your head on it. So I think a lateral way is the only. I think it's the more durable way.
I'm going back to the movie.
Mm.
That while there is that choice of love and compassion through the movie, there is a loss at the end,
Yes.
right? And the loss um, is is a is of no return, is a point of no return, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I'm kind of left with this thought that there like a need for that loss at every stage for us to be sticking to the path of love and compassion, right? And yeah, and as against the point of activism, which is also necessary in some way, and a point of aggression, which is also possibly necessary in some way, calling out the injustices and inequities in some way, but kind of also realizing that there is going to be those losses if we are going to be picking to choose the path of love and compassion.
Yeah.
And are we okay with it?
My belief is losses are there either way. I think anger comes from grief. Anger comes from a sense of loss. So even when people are being violent or angry, I think it's inevitable until we reach the place of love, whether we choose love or we choose anger. And I was not scary actually. The fact that me and Padma can actually align so much for me is these lateral, where you started, Padma, that if these lateral thoughts come together, and that's the metaphor from which we can make poetry. So I am like, oh my God, if all the good people could come together, the fact that I have never spoken to you, or I've never considered, having an artist come and give me their perspective on education.
Well, my therapist told me that this world is now transitioning. It's transitioning from the love of power to the power of love, and this transition is going to cause collateral damage. So losses are inevitable, and we have to be realistic enough to expect this. To expect some collateral damage, but I think the returns are too amazing for us to hide or step back from whatever we want to do. So love of power to power of love, there are going to be damages, there are going to be losses. We just have to embrace that reality and keep uh, keep moving ahead with some conviction, whatever we have, and belief, I think.
As a last question, right? And Padma, this is for you, and I'm kind of it's an invitation, right? Padma, and this is I'm starting with the first question you asked me, saying I'm willing to engage in a dialogue as long as it turns into something concrete.
Yes.
So Suchetha and kind of represents the voice in the education space where
Yes.
we are able to bring that change, right? Where
Yeah.
we are able to kind of reimagine. That invitation has already been sent out, and it's kind of going to stay this transition that we're talking about.
Yes.
So if you
Yeah.
are to share your thoughts on what Suchetha, Dream a Dream, and the young people and the people who are involved in the education space can change, what would your wish list look like, right, for the child? And for the child,
Mm.
not just for the child, so that this path we are kind of embarking on can be a little easier than
Mm.
what we are seeing now.
Well, I attended this Edward de Bono session a long time ago. Uh, and he was talking about introducing thinking as a subject in schools. You know, just thinking, and it's a wonderful thing. You give them one little stimulus and tell them think about it. You give them a piece of art and say think about it and tell me what it is. Or introduce them to something, I don't know why, for instance, filmmaking, uh, shouldn't be introduced as a first standard subject. Why can't film appreciation be introduced as a first standard subject? And like I told you, Padmaja, you know when I showed Children of Heaven and Life is Beautiful to Dhruva at a very, very young age, he he loved it, and he felt deeply, sensitized to a lot of things. Children of Heaven is a simple film. It's just about uh, a brother and sister sharing one pair of shoes, and how moving is that, right? At a young age, you don't even get the American accent so easily, and we're all straining to understand what they're saying, misinterpreting it, and that in itself was so much fun. And uh, I wish a lot of these things could be re-inculcated in rural schools, and your international schools are anyway, uh, they've become air conditioning classrooms. So I mean, what can you even say, to all of that? And they have their own swimming pools in their premises. Good for them. It's fantastic. But at the same time, if we lateralized things, and without challenging the system, you know, you tell them you have your 8 classes a day, 8 periods of regimented study. Start small and say, take a, just reduce every class by 5 minutes, and then give 40 minutes to a short film, or 40 minutes to and just an art session, or 40 minutes to a classical performance or music, or a small little thing that you know that they just take home to their everyday life. That way they may be able to educate their parents, you know and tell them, now listen to this, because every house has a mobile phone to a large extent now, and data is very cheap, thanks to the monopolists. So uh, you know just getting them to listen to something of quality other than uh, what they normally watch, that itself is an eye opener. And it's all small baby steps. Yep. There's this website called Gaia.com. Okay, my daughter's name is Gaia as well. And Gaia.com, they have some very interesting observations. They talk about a whole lot of very different things, alien life, possibility of life on other planets, you know, uh, and the ancient worlds that existed on this planet before our current Homo sapiens, whatever. So very interesting theories and stuff like that. But one of the observations is the categorization of a certain variety of human beings as the indigo generation, which started off in the 70s, where a new breed of especially sensitive, artistically oriented, compassionate, uh, lateral thinking, broader minded individuals, and which were rare, and slowly growing into the what is called the crystal generation, which is the children born especially in this millennium, saying that this generation has a greater, a much better developed left and right brain. So they are the generation that can actually integrate art and technology, learn very varied skills and integrate them. They're much more attuned to music and art. They have a greater sort of ability to pick all of those things up, or appreciate lateral thought. They're much more compassionate towards the earth and nature and animals, all of that. And they call the crystal generation, and it's apparently there is a larger number of this today. It's not universal, it's not everyone, but the preponderance of this variety of individual is much higher now than ever before, is what they say. And I'm a great believer in this, in the fact that there is such a thing as a crystal generation. And in my conversations with young students and even young professionals, I talk about this, and you know I talk about the crystal generation, what really separates them from generations before. And the idea is also to make people believe that they do belong to a very special breed, because if you believe it, then you behave it. right? So, if you tell someone, listen, man, you're a wonderful writer, you should write more. He will write more, and that's one way of actually inspiring a whole new generation too.
The excitement of having these conversations, to listen to people who are from a different background and learn something. And I think what I'm taking away, and again, as part of the what if, was that if you were to just take a pause and listen, what new insight might come. And that's kind of where I'm left with after having spent this hour with you, Padma. That what if we were to really lateralize education, right? I'm hearing you use the word lateral and it's staying with me. What if we could lateralize learning and education, especially using the arts, to help us unify and delight in our differences? So these are some of the words you said that have really stayed with me. And I can say that talking to you is my first step towards this commitment, but I also commit to translate this into action in the work that I can influence through Dream a Dream. So thank you for taking the time.